I'm very glad to be welcoming Roger Rosen, and I want to thank all of you for being here today. If you're like me and eager to continue learning about the world around us and the complexities of being a human being in 2021, I think today's program will hopefully give you an opportunity to bring your curiosity and your questions to the subject of gender identity and queer theory. So I want to just give you a little bit of background about Roger. Roger Rosen is an artist, performer, writer, teacher, activist, and husband. He received a BFA in acting from Tisch School of the Arts at NYU, which led to a nearly 20-year career as a performer in musical theater. During that time, he performed in Europe, as well as throughout the United States. On Broadway, he danced, captained, and swung the 2004 revival of Fiddler on the Roof, starring Alfred Molina and Randy Graff, and then Harvey Fierstein and Andrea Martin, who was replaced by Rosie O'Donnell. When he retired from performing, he reconnected with his other artistic endeavors and academic pursuits, leaping into writing and activism and formalizing a lifelong passion of queer theory by getting his MFA in interdisciplinary arts with a concentration in performance creation from Goddard College. He joins us today from the great state of New Jersey, where the pizza is spectacular and the left turns are confusing. So I turn it over to you, Roger. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. Also, I just want to point out that this could be a crossover presentation with the LGBTQ elder community, as I'm working on it myself, becoming a member, very close. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, Jeff, for inviting me to have this conversation. So today's conversation is queer and gender theory. You'd be surprised what you already know. I'll explain what that means in one moment. I'm Roger. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I will be your guide today. So before we begin, I'm gonna ask for a few things from you. I'm gonna ask you to join me on this little trip we're gonna take. Some of it might be complicated. Some of it might challenge some things you already know. Some of it you may not grasp immediately, but I'm gonna ask you to come with me and keep an open mind to some potentially new ideas or concepts. Also, as Jeff said, there will be a Q&A at the end, but I'm here to serve you. I'm here for you, and I want to answer your questions. So if you have a question during the presentation, please type it into the chat, and I will answer it as we go. If we get wildly off my slides are less important than answering your questions and serving your needs. So yeah, so just know that, and I'll probably come back to that idea of asking questions throughout the presentation. So my first question that I'd love for you to type into the chat, it looks super aggressive. Why are you here? What I mean by that is, why did you show up? Why did you take time out of your schedule and your life? What do you hope to get from our time together? So if you could take a minute and type that into the chat, what you're hoping for in the next hour, I'd love to answer that. While you're typing, I'm going to tell you why I am here. I'm here for a few reasons. One, I'm here to learn. I learn by having these conversations. I never walk away from them, whether I'm teaching or presenting or whatever I'm doing. I never walk away the same. So that's one of the reasons I'm here. The other reason I'm here is because when I was a pretty young teenager, I looked in my bathroom mirror one day, and I realized this thing that I had been feeling my whole life that I had no name for. It suddenly became a word, right? That word was gay. And I realized that the image in front of me was that word, right? So that was the single most terrifying moment of my life. My entire life since that moment has been to try and answer the question, why should that moment have been terrifying? And beyond that, in whatever capacity I can. I feel a real responsibility to try and alleviate from others having that moment. People should not be terrified of who they are. And so, and people should not be terrified to live in the world as they are. So those are the reasons that I am here. I see one, to support and to challenge what I thought I knew about queer and gender theory. Thank you. Did anybody else write in that I'm not seeing?
Yes. Let me go
cool.
through a couple of these. Yeah, there's some good ones here.
Awesome. I'm going to take notes.
Okay. First comment here is, I'm hoping to learn things so I don't offend anyone with my ignorance. I think that's probably where a lot of us are coming from. Another comment or question, response rather, I want to be an ally and advocate for my friends. I want to understand what they are going through every day. Hope I'm not going too fast for you to get notes there. Okay. Another response, I am confused by some of the pronouns that are preferred that have historically been plural, but some people want to use it as singular.
So they, are we talking about they?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. Great.
Let's see a couple more here. I want to increase my knowledge. Growing up, this was not talked about.
Cool.
Okay, this another one, did not plan to be here, home for lunch, and this lecture was available as an educational forum at the exact time I have available. So it was meant to be. I think I am open-minded, but enlightened me and broadened my perspective.
Awesome. There are no bad reasons to be here at all. I tell my students that all the time. If you're here because you don't like to get up in the morning, you're still here. So yeah. Fantastic.
Yep. And I got one more. And again, if anyone hasn't responded yet and still would like to, feel free to do so. One more here. It starts with a quote, above all else, know thyself. What is it that I know that I don't know? That statement in the program description grabbed my interest.
That was Jeff's. So thanks, Jeff.
No problem. Okay, so that's all I have in the chat so far. And I think certainly have an engaged audience, I think here, Roger, and hopefully some way to give you some further focus on the discussion.
We're gonna do all of that. Thank you all. Thank you for answering. Before we really get into it, I want to wish everyone a really happy Pride. And I want to discuss briefly the Stonewall Inn, what happened, what it really was, and what it wasn't. This is a plaque that sits outside the Stonewall Inn. I'm going to read it. It might be small for you. The events that began at the Stonewall Inn in 1969 marked a monumental change for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer Americans. Stonewall, which occupied 5153 Christopher Street, was a gay bar that was raided on June 28, 1969. Patrons and a crowd outside resisted, and confrontations continued over the next few nights in nearby Christopher Park and on adjacent streets. This uprising catalyzed the LGBTQ civil rights movement, resulting in increased visibility for the community that continues to resonate in the struggle for equality. That was in 2016 when the site was designated a historic landmark. Couple of points about Stonewall. Its mythology is different than maybe the reality. I'm all for symbolism, but I also believe in knowing what things are. Stonewall is situated within a history of activism and protest. It was not a singular event. There were protests and organizations and activists working long before 1969. And there were other riots prior to 1969. One of the reasons we celebrate Stonewall with pride is because the year after it happened, they held a parade to commemorate it. The other riots didn't necessarily get a parade on its anniversary. So I also want to point out that we talk a lot about the bar was raided, but we lose the meaning of that. The police went into a bar where people weren't doing anything illegal, although there are laws to control gay people, what we wear, whether we dance together, but they were, imagine you're in a straight bar with straight people and the police come in and arrest you. So that's what we're talking about. This happened repeatedly. And I want to point out that this is not necessarily things that happened in the past. So just briefly, from this book, Queer Injustice, March of 2003, a private club in Highland Park in Detroit, frequently and primarily attended by African-American gay men, lesbians, and transgender women, was filled to capacity at around 3 a.m. between 50 and 100 officers from the Wayne County Sheriff's Department, dressed in black clothing with guns drawn and laser sights on, cut the lights, shouted orders for everyone to hit the floor. Over 350 people in the club at the time were handcuffed, forced to lie face down on the floor and detained for up to 12 hours, left to sit in their own and others' urine and waste. There was physical and verbal violence. They were called gay epithets. And over 300 people were arrested. They were cited with loitering inside a building. That's literally what you do in a bar. If you've ever been to a bar, you're standing. So that was 2003. They were arrested for loitering inside a building. In 2009, the Atlanta Eagle was raided, a leather gay bar in Atlanta. And in the summer of 2020, amidst the Black Lives Matter protest, 2 gay bars were raided. So this is last year. To be clear, this is not 1969. It's not even 2003. So the things that were happening continue to happen. Also, I want to point out that the bar that was raided in 2003 consisted mostly of BIPOC patrons, BIPOC meaning Black, Indigenous, and people of color. That community faces significantly higher rates of policing, harassment, and abuse from law enforcement than the white community, and queer people face higher rates as compared with their straight counterparts. So this is where it gets very intersectional with regards to how we are policed, how we are allowed to conduct ourselves in public. So a little secret about queer and gender theory, which you're going to get from the subtitle. You already know all you need to know. So it's a bit hyperbolic, but I'm going to prove to you that you know more than you think you do in a minute. Another secret about how I work and how I approach my work, I value questions over answers. So I'm hoping today that you leave with more questions than you started with. I'm hoping to kind of make some things that seem super easy and convenient. I'm actually hoping to challenge that, so that when you're in the world, you're a little maybe more questioning than you were when we began. And so I hope you'll stay open to that. To prove that you know a little bit more about queer and gender theory than you think you do, I'm going to use Rock Hudson and Doris Day. Does anybody know who Rock Hudson and Doris Day are? I hope you do. If not, they are movie stars from the mid-20th century. They made 3 romantic comedies together. This clip I'm going to use is from their first one together, Pillow Talk, made in 1959. The only thing you need to know plot-wise in order for this to make sense is that in the first clip, as you can see from your screen right now, they are on the phone, Rock Hudson and Doris Day. In the second clip, they meet in a bar. Doris Day does not know that that is the same person. She has never seen the man on the phone, so she is unaware that she has been set up. Okay, so let's watch the clip and then we're gonna talk about it. All right, so this is a fantastic leaping off point for today's discussion. I'm gonna ask a question. You can answer a simple yes, no in the chat. So did you understand what was going on? Did you understand what the Rock Hudson character playing 2 different people Did you understand what he was implying? So I'll give you all a minute to type in yes or no.
So I'll read these as they're coming in. Yes, yes, of course, yes, yes.
Good. If you'd all answered no, I was going to have to come up with a new presentation right now. If you did, then you know about queer and gender theory.
One quick one here, Roger, I'm going to throw in. Yes, I think so. I'm also shocked that this was in 1959.
Yes, well, we're going to talk about that. There are like multiple ways to look at this clip. I'm going to take us through a couple of them. One, the singer's name is Perry Blackwell. This movie, which I watched again last night, exists in New York City that is solely composed of white people. The only people of color in it are musicians in a couple of scenes. She does not speak. She only sings, and in another scene, there are a series of reaction shots. There are no people of color who are extras. That's it. And that's how movies, that's a kind of form of storytelling in this kind of mythical land of Hollywood that still persists today. The idea of class, these people just have money. They just have great apartments, great clothes, it's not a problem. Again, speaks to this kind of storytelling mythology. Another kind of way that makes your head explode is that Rock Hudson is a gay man in real life, in the closet, playing a straight man in real life. He was totally closeted. He was a big movie star and like a man's man. So he was in the closet. And then in this movie, he's playing a straight man pretending to be a gay man. It's a lot. So I'm glad you all understood what was going on. And what that tells us is a couple things. Probably because of the Hays Commission or the production code, they never say he's gay. It is implied. And because they never say it, he has to do a series of things. He drinks with his pinky up. He implies that this character that she's dating has a bunch of stereotypically female qualities, is smothered by his mother, likes gossip, is interested in color and fabrics. They never say it, but we all get it. He implies a lack of masculinity and he implies femininity, which means gay. She responds with, what a vicious thing to say. The implication that somebody is gay is vicious, and we all understand that. Never spoken, but we get it. And then the idea of cat and mouse, just the idea of cat and mouse, that we all understand what that is. So everybody has their role. He has his role. He's going to be the aggressor. She is going to try and get away. She's like, men are always predatory and aggressive. Women are trying to bat them away to maintain their virtue. We understood all of that. So that is a language that the filmmakers expected us to understand, right? That is a language of gender roles. That's a language of sex roles. And so they spoke to us in this language, and we are able to receive it because this is what we have learned in our culture, in our society. So when I say you know all you need to know, if you understood that, then you understand a great many forces that we are taught. And it starts from before we're born. We have gender reveal parties, which are problematic, but when a person tells you that they are pregnant, one of the first questions is, what is it? Not born yet, but what is it? Is it a boy or a girl? It's really important. When you see a 1-month-old in a carriage, it could be bald, but it's likely to have like a headband, pink headband with a bow. Now, I'm pretty sure that 1-month-old didn't pick it to express themselves, and it's not serving any purpose because that human is bald. That is purely to tell you that this human was identified as a girl at birth, right? So I was having a dinosaur because obviously I was having a human, exactly. So that's what I mean when I say, you know what you need to know. This is what we just watched is never specifically stated. I was going to show the clip again, but I'm actually just going to move past it. So what we just did with that clip is we looked at it through a queer theory lens. Queer theory studies and challenges gender and sexual norms. That's exactly what we just walked through. In other words, queer theory is the practice of challenging heteronormativity. What is heteronormativity? That's a really good question, and I'm glad you asked. Heteronormativity. This is really important. We're going to sit here for 1 second. From a Dictionary of Social Work and Social Care by John Harris and Vicky White. The assumption that heterosexuality is the default, preferred, or normal state for human beings. Not even going to get into the rest yet. Just going to repeat that. The assumption that heterosexuality is the default, preferred, or normal state for human beings. To put that in context, there cannot be a normal without an abnormal. It cannot exist. It's an incredibly powerful and destructive idea that there is a normal. So this is why we have police raids on queer establishments, because what is going on there is by nature abnormal. It's why the BIPOC community is targeted more than the white community, because normal is set by white people. And honestly, it is why when I looked in the mirror as a young teenager, I was terrified, because it was the recognition that I was abnormal. I already knew. I'd gotten all the messages. So that's a really important thing that I'm gonna come back to. Now, getting to pronouns and other words, right? So we get hung up on the words, they keep changing. We just did heteronormativity, but then there's ally, and there's cisgender, genderqueer, pansexual, transgender, gender nonconforming, non-binary, asexual, bi, trans, masculine, feminine, gender expansive, poly. It honestly changes every day. And mostly with the addition of new words. The whole language changes. Language changes every day to reflect people's experience and to reflect the culture. So the Human Rights Campaign has a glossary of terms where you can basically Google the terms if you're interested. And they do change all the time. And it is super easy to get, oh, I'm a month late on this new term, right? Because we are breaking out of this man, woman, boy, girl idea, which I think is great. And people are discovering language to use for themselves. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Feel free to write them in the chat. Referring to the question earlier about the use of the pronoun they. Actually, they is really old. It dates back to the, I think the 1300s as a singular, like they dropped their car off. It is incredibly old. It is not new. Number one. Number two, we use they all the time. So the person before you at a restaurant, when we used to go to restaurants, leaves their umbrella and you did not see them. And you tell the member of the wait staff, the person before me, they left their umbrella, right? So the only difference that seems confusing for people is that you think you know that person's gender identity and they want you to use they. There, I just did it again. They want you to use they. So it's not new and we do already use it. It's just a new way for many to use pronouns. So going back to the terms, Language is really important. How people identify, how they tell you they wish to be addressed, the words they use to describe themselves. Us using that back is a form of respect, it's a form of kindness. And it's really important. I do not want to diminish the importance of language, but it is Googleable. I want to keep us on task with the experience of these things. So putting it in context, I don't want us to get hung up on it. Frequently people hear all the new words and they're like, oh, it's too much, I don't know, and they give up. They give up, they just don't want to know anymore. I would ask that you sit with that for a minute and we keep going. With all of these new words is a new understanding of how we identify, process, live within our own identities. We're going to sit with this for a second, because if you've never thought about it, it might be a lot. This cartoon is from Trans Student Educational Resources. It's the gender unicorn, super cute. And it breaks out identity, expression, sex assigned at birth, physically attracted to, and emotionally attracted to. None of these things talk to each other, but they are not the same thing. How you express yourself may be different to other people's eyes than your identity. Your sex assigned at birth may be different than your identity or expression. Who you're attracted to is a whole other ballgame. So all of these things are actually separate. And within each of us, they talk to each other, but they do not have to line up in a way that we understand. They're all separate entities. And so this is a really simplistic way of breaking it down, kind of a complicated series of identities and ways of being in the world. So sex assigned at birth, a human being comes out, you look in between its legs, you say it's male, it's female. More often than not, it is intersex, more often than we know. That does not necessarily dictate how that person is going to want to move through the world. Female, woman, girl, man, woman, man, male, man, boy, other, right? So there's kind of this idea of gender expansive. Gender expression doesn't necessarily have to match gender identity, right? So I get it, all of this is kind of dense if you haven't processed it before. Does anybody have any questions at this point?
Hey, Roger. So we did have a question that I think was related to this, but also to the vocabulary, the pronouns that you were referring to.
Mm-hmm.
The question is they is, in quotes, now proper English? So I think there is, I think number one, there's an unfamiliarity with just using that term in everyday conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But then in terms of how it fits into forming sentences and things like that.
Yep. Grammatically, it is exactly as you would naturally use it. So the person next to you at the theater is late. It's just a single seat. You say, I don't know when they're going to get here. Right? So it's exactly as you would use it. If you are in doubt, pretend you've never seen the person and don't have any sense of how they may or may not identify, is a pretty good rule of thumb, because we use it all the time when we have no knowledge of a person. So it is, they're running late, exactly as you would naturally utilize that. So that's the gender unicorn. It just, again, breaks out all of these things that we're taught are singular, but they're actually multi-layered. To talk about that quickly, I'm going to use Dr. Karen Tang. She talks very quickly, honestly, very quickly. She's a fast talker. And she's going to talk quickly about biology, and she's going to talk about gender. I'm going to preempt her by saying she's confusing. Honestly, she goes through a lot of information really quickly. And I'm going to talk about that when I'm done showing the clip. But I just want you to be aware of that so that you don't tune out. She talks quickly with a lot of technical expertise. So let's listen to her real quick.
So the big question is, what is the difference between biological sex and gender? So typically when people make really simplistic statements like there are two, they're saying that there is male and female. So oftentimes what they're referring to is biological sex, which if you break it down consists of a couple of things. Genetics, so what chromosomes do you have? Do you have XX or XY sex chromosomes? What gonads do you have? Do you have ovaries or do you have testes? What internal genitalia do you have? Do you have a uterus, tubes, and vagina, or do you have seminiferous tubules and vas deferens? And what external genitalia do you have? Do you have a clitoris and vulva, or do you have a penis and scrotum? Also, what hormone status do you have? Do you have more testosterone, or do you have more estrogen and progesterone? Whereas gender has to do with identity, and even in an anthropological sense, in the role that someone plays within a society. We'll talk more about gender and gender identity and expression later in the video. But first, we'll start with biology. Because biology is the more straightforward and clear-cut one, right? Wrong, because there's a whole group of conditions called disorders or differences of sex development, or DSD, what we formerly called intersex conditions. Now, these are incredibly complicated conditions. In fact, I felt like I was preparing for my board exams again when I was trying to research for this video, just to get some of the details right. I'm not a geneticist, I'm not an endocrinologist, I'm assuming most of you guys are not as well. I just wanted to give a sense of the complexity and a little bit of an explanation as to how some of the differences in development can lead to some of these different outcomes. And I also wanted to just kind of raise awareness that these issues exist. And I got a lot of comments on the TikTok about things like, oh, these conditions are so rare and like almost never do they happen. Well, it's actually a lot more common than you might think. When I was researching and learning more, I discovered that up to 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 4,000 children at birth may have a DSD that requires evaluation. So what quote unquote typically happens in development that would lead to someone becoming biological male or female? Now, before I start, I did want to say, again, I'm not going to go into like crazy nitty gritty genes and things like that. You know, I just fully admit I don't have that level of expertise, and I also don't want to lose everyone. It's not a video about genetics. For those of you who aren't particularly interested in biology, please feel free to skip to later in the video. I don't want you to feel like you're being trapped and forced to watch anything, but I hope most of you will find it interesting. So first we start with chromosomes. Most of you remember from high school biology that the typical female pattern is XX and male pattern is XY. You inherit these one from each parent. So most importantly is on the Y chromosome, there is one particular gene called the SRY gene, or sex determining region on the Y chromosome gene, that if you have it, then your gonads will become testes. If you don't have it, they will become ovaries. The testes then also will do two things. One is secrete more testosterone, which is the quote unquote male.
Okay, she goes on for a bit. My point in showing this to you is not that we should all understand all of the complexity and nuance of our biological sex. My point is that when people say there's a boy and a girl, it's very simple. When we hear people talk about the simplicity of biological sex, that is actually point blank, factually untrue. It is not simple. It is multi-layered. It is complex. It is complicated. They are taking an incredibly complex series of events and making it simple for their own purpose, whatever that purpose may be. So the simplicity of XXXY is actually false. There's nothing simple about it. And actually, as she said, what we used to call intersex, that term, again, with the words, has fallen out of favor. 1,100 to 4,000 births, somebody is presented with genitalia that does not say boy or girl. That's pretty common. So I just wanted to give you that. I'm gonna give her quickly, I want her to talk about what is gender. So there, we're just gonna watch this real quick.
Information, so please check those out. Now, talking about gender, again, a caveat, I'm obviously not a gender scholar. I may get some of these terms wrong. Obviously, please correct me if there's anything kind of glaringly wrong, but I wanted to kind of try and discuss some of these issues, especially contrasted with biological sex. In general, gender has to do with identity and social norms. And so in the video, I mentioned that gender is socially constructed. Now, in some of the snarkier comments on my video, a lot of people were like, well, I thought you were talking about science. Now you're just giving opinion. And I would say these are the literal definition of gender. I'm going to put on my glasses and read some of these definitions. Oxford Dictionary, either of the two sexes, especially when considered with reference to social and cultural differences rather than biological ones. The term is also used more broadly to denote a range of identities that do not correspond to established ideas of male and female. And also the WHO, or the World Health Organization, I thought this was beautifully phrased. Gender refers to characteristics that are socially constructed. As a social construct, gender varies from society to society and can change over time. Gender interacts with but is different from sex, which refers to the different biological and physiological characteristics of males, female, and intersex persons, such as we talked about, chromosomes, hormones, and reproductive organs. Gender and sex are related to but different from gender identity. Gender identity refers to a person's deeply felt internal and individual experience of gender, which may or may not correspond to the person's physiology or designated sex at birth. Boom. So,
all right. So she assists in explaining the gender unicorn. She's brilliant. You can follow her on YouTube or TikTok. Any questions, comments, concerns? Should we keep going?
I think so. I don't have any other questions or comments there. I think it might be helpful. I know you had the gender unicorn up there for a little bit, but I think having a chance, I don't know if that was one of the links you sent me, so that might be a helpful thing that we could pass along.
Yes, I will do that.
Great.
So this is to keep this in mind. As she pointed out, everything we know about sex, sexuality, and gender is contextual. We know it because we're taught it in our culture and in our society. If you look elsewhere, they will view sex, gender, and sexuality very differently than we do. These things are not monolithic. Right? They change over time. They change in place. This is from Queer: A Graphic History by Meg John Barker and Jules Scheel. Historical and cultural diversity in how gender is understood shows us that identities need not be binary, nor based on our current understandings of what it is to be masculine and feminine. These things change. They change over time. They change all the time. So I'm going to show us a little bit of gender around the world. This is Billy Porter at the Oscars in 2019, wearing a magnificent velvet gown with a tuxedo top. He did not describe himself when he wears dresses. He does not describe himself as trans. He's a cis man. Does not describe himself as a drag queen. He describes himself as a man in a dress. And one can wonder, why can a man not wear a dress other than we've decided it? There's no reason. Looking around the world, I just want to give a couple of examples. You can click on all of these points. This is a PBS site and map. It's interactive. So all of these different points will explain a different view of sex and gender in a different culture. So I'm just going to do a couple of them. This is indigenous to North America. The two-spirit Zuni tradition is known as Lamina, in which a person lives as both genders simultaneously. They play a key role in society as mediators, priests, and artists. That's really important. They play a key role in society. So it's a completely different view of gender, right? These people who live as both genders simultaneously are mediators. That's a judge. That's a lawyer. These are revered roles in society. Priests, religious leaders. Religious leaders perform ceremonies. They keep ritual alive in a culture. People go to them for advice. So these are really revered roles. One more. The creation myth of the Mojave tribe speaks to a time when humans were not sexually or gender differentiated, right? We made that up. And it's actually pretty new since about the Victorian era, that this is how we sorted ourselves as humans. It's a pretty new idea. They recognize 4 genders: men, women, WAME, male-identified females, and aliha, female-identified males. And I'm just going to do one more because the Bugis people of southern Sulawesi recognize 3 sexes and 5 genders: men, women, Chalabai, Chalalai, and Bisu. And again, Bisu are considered transcendent, encompassing all genders or none at all. They serve rituals in the culture and are sometimes equated with priests. So again, this just shows us that our view of these things is not the only view. It is simply one. This is much more expansive and much more differentiated than we might be led to believe. And now for the most important question. Why does this matter? Right? Why go through all of this? Why study this? Because these things play out in our lives. They play out over our dinner tables. They play out on Facebook. They play out in line at Starbucks. The more we move away from heteronormativity, that normal idea of how we are, how we identify, how we move through the world, the bigger a price we pay. We pay on the playground. I can tell you I paid a price on the playground. We pay in the workforce. We pay in our housing. We pay in violence, sexual and otherwise. We pay with the police. There are very strict rules concerning sex, gender, and how all of that is policed, both formally with the police and informally on the playground. The Trevor Project is a national organization, and their mission is to end suicide among gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, queer, and questioning young people. This national survey, where is it? Sorry, I think I'm making your head hurt by scrolling really quickly. 2021 LGBTQ youth mental health survey. They found 42% of LGBT youth seriously considered attempting suicide, including more than half of trans and non-binary youth. 12% of white youth attempted suicide compared to 31% of Native Indigenous youth, 21% of Black youth, 21% multiracial youth, 18% Latinx youth, 12% Asian Pacific Islander. So again, we see how all of these various forces interact intersectionally. But I also want to take a second. It's really easy to look, well, it's not easy, but percentages. It's just a number, right? 42%, over 50%. But we're talking about your kids. We're talking about your grandkids. We're talking about your cousins, your brothers, your sisters, your parents. These are people in your lives. These are not percentages, right? These are people that you work with, that you work for, that work for you. These are people. So I get hung up when I see 42% because it's pretty cold, but I want you to see actual human faces. Okay, I need to go back there. This is again from the Human Rights Campaign. I'm not sure exactly when this article was posted. It didn't have a date, but it was 2021. Fatal violence against the transgender community and gender nonconforming community in 2021. We're only 6 months in, so even if this is a day old, it's 24 weeks. 2021 has already seen at least 29 transgender or gender nonconforming people fatally shot or killed by other violent means. That's more than one a week. So why does this stuff matter? Because if you do not conform to this idea of heteronormativity, you will pay, right? And that is a tragedy. This is an epidemic of murder. We say at least because too often these stories go unreported or misreported. In previous years, the majority of these people were Black and Latinx trans women. Again, we come to intersectionality. In 2020, a total of 44 fatalities were tracked by HRC, marking that as the most violent year on record. So that is why this is important. Lately, we've been seeing a lot about trans girls on sports teams. This is a purely transphobic idea. No one has yet come up with a reason other than we don't want trans people playing with our young girls. That's really the only reason they can come up with. They try and use science. There's boy and girl. That's not true. I don't know if you can read this, but I'm going to read it for you. So this is from Scientific American, March 16th. The notion of transgender girls having an unfair advantage comes from the idea that testosterone causes physical changes such as an increase in muscle mass. But trans girls are not the only girls with high testosterone levels. An estimated 10% of women have polycystic ovarian syndrome, which results in elevated testosterone. They are not banned from female sports. Trans girls on puberty blockers have negligible testosterone levels, yet state bills would force them to play with boys. Plus, the athletic advantage conferred by testosterone is equivocal. Katrina Karzakis, a senior visiting fellow and expert on testosterone and bioethics at Yale University, explains, quote, studies of testosterone levels in athletes do not show any clear, consistent relationship between testosterone and athletic performance. So what you're hearing is simply transphobia, especially when we're talking about kids, right? The idea that trans people should not be able to use restrooms is solely to keep trans people out of public life. You cannot participate in public life if you cannot use a restroom throughout the course of your day, right? And so now we are trying to protect girls' sports. This does nothing of the sort. And none of the people fighting to keep trans girls out of sports have ever mentioned girls' sports before in their entire careers. Suddenly they're very interested in girls' sports. And scientifically, they're incorrect, for the record. I'm gonna start to wrap up. I'm gonna leave you with a couple of thoughts. This is Judith Butler. She is brilliant. She is an American philosopher and gender theorist. This is a quick 2-minute clip, which really succinctly gets at the heart of everything I've been discussing. Okay, so let's just listen to Judith for a moment.
There's a story that came out around, I don't know, 8 years ago of a young man who lived in Maine, and he walked down the street of his small town where he had lived his entire life. And he walks with what we call a swish, the kind of his hips move back and forth in a feminine way. And as he grew older, 14, 15, 16, that swish, that walk became more pronounced, okay? And it was more dramatically feminine. And he started to be harassed by the boys in the town. And soon 2 or 3 boys stopped his walk. And they fought with him. And they ended up throwing him over a bridge. And they killed him. Okay. So then we have to ask, why would someone be killed for the way they walk? Well, why would that walk be so upsetting to those other boys that they would feel that they must negate this person, they must expunge the trace of this person, they must stop that walk no matter what. They must eradicate the possibility of that person ever walking again. It seems to me that we're talking about an extremely deep panic or fear, an anxiety that pertains to gender norms. And if someone says you must comply with the norm of masculinity, otherwise you will die, or I kill you now because you do not comply, then we have to start to question what the relation is between complying with gender and coercion.
She's so brilliant. So I just want to quote her. Why would that walk be so upsetting to those other boys that they would feel that they must negate this person? They must expunge the trace of this person. They must stop that walk no matter what. They must eradicate the possibility of that person ever walking again. That is what we are talking about, right? When we talk about queer and gender theory.
There's a story.
Oh, we watched that. In conclusion, this is my last slide, almost. I wanted to wrap it up with Audrey Lord, who is, if you don't know who she is, please Google her. She is my intellectual and spiritual hero. She describes herself as a Black lesbian mother warrior poet. She is a brilliant writer and activist whose work and life were dedicated to fighting racism, sexism, classism, capitalism, heterosexism, and homophobia. This quote I'm going to read is from Sister Outsider, which is a book of essays and speeches. And this is from a piece called Uses of the Erotic. And in this quote, in this piece, the word erotic is rather expansively used. It is not just referring to sexual pleasure. She refers to a deep pleasure regardless of the activity. So she refers to painting a fence or writing a poem or physical touch. She says, the erotic functions for me in several ways. And the first is in providing the power which comes from sharing deeply any pursuit with another person. The sharing of joy, whether physical, emotional, psychic, or intellectual, forms a bridge between the sharers, which can be the basis for understanding what is not shared between them, and lessens the threat of their difference. So earlier I spoke about why I was here. I am here hoping that you will take away questions, and you will ask them of yourselves when you're in the world. I hope you will question how we are towards one another, what messages we've received about other human beings and how those messages influence our behavior regarding classism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, whatever those things are that dictate how we are with one another. I hope you'll ask those questions. And I am here today hoping, to quote Audrey Lord, to lessen the threat of difference. So I hope I did that a little bit today for you and with you. And I thank you for your time and for your ears and for your open hearts.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Roger.
Thank you.
I'll want to encourage anyone. I do have one question I'm going to get to in a second. If you have any questions, and I think I really mean it, any questions, there are no dumb questions here. This is the perfect opportunity to ask those questions or comments that you may have. Type those into the chat. I did want to just take a moment to thank one of our other presenters. I think he's actually here today, Stephen Nakami, who many of you I know have enjoyed his Broadway presentations. Stephen was nice enough to introduce me to Roger, and thus we were able to put together today's program. And in fact, I'm looking forward to talking with Roger about some future programs as well. I do want to remind everybody that we did record today's program. Once we have that edited, I will make sure that gets posted to our YouTube page. So I did put some various links into the chat. So if there's any of those you want to further look into, I'm also going to put my email address, my library email, into the chat as well. So if there's any of those links you didn't catch yet, you can certainly email me, and I'm happy to share those. There's obviously so much to dig into, and I think certainly for me as well, I have come away with not only greater understanding, but more questions and more curious things to look into.
Cool.
So let me get into some of what's here in the chat. Stephen did say he's here, and thank you.
Should I stop sharing my screen now, or should we?
You know what might be nice? If you wouldn't mind bringing back the unicorn, the gender unicorn. I think it's just helpful as a visual up there in terms of what you've been discussing today. That might be helpful to have that up. So the first question I have here, and I think this is certainly a question that many people have had regarding public bathrooms. I have a concern that multi-stall bathrooms could present an opportunity for predators by being open to everyone. The very exclusionary act of only female or only male, though I recognize its unfairness, can open up to other problems.
Awesome. Thank you for asking that. Couple of things. There are zero, that's literal, 0 instances of trans women doing anything other than using a facility. There's 0 instances of a trans woman harassing anyone, abducting anyone, harming anyone. That's number 1. 0 reported instances. Number 2, think to yourself, you are a trans person in a bathroom. Who's scared? My guess is it's you, right? You're probably scared for your safety as a trans person. So we have identified a victim that doesn't exist, because trans women do not harm people in bathrooms. And B, we've identified the wrong victim. Generally, if I were a trans person, I'd be terrified. I would be absolutely terrified to use a public restroom. And finally, the bigger picture is the problem with the argument that people will be harassed, or we have to protect our girls, right, from straight men, cis men, dressing up as women, saying they're women, and stealing our girls or doing awful things. The problem is inherent in the question, which is we have a problem with rape culture, and we have a problem with violence by men perpetrated on women. That's not a problem with trans women. That's a problem with cis men. So we should address that and not create a problem for trans women that technically doesn't exist in the slightest.
So I think a follow-up, so the person who asked the question said, I'm not worried about the trans people in the bathroom. I'm concerned about the quote unquote crazy pervert straight person. That's the person who can take advantage. And I think you just addressed that in terms of that's a...
Agreed, that is, yeah, if that were to happen, that is not a problem with trans people, nor legislating where trans people can or can't go to the bathroom. The other problem is, it's multi-layered. This is why the other side has an easier time, right? The other side can make a 15-second spot, right, to run on your television or on your iPhone. 15 seconds, protect your kids, right? Super easy. Who doesn't want to protect their kids? And I'm going to give you an explanation that's going to take a minute and some of your thought and energy to actually arrive at a reasonable conclusion. I can't do it in 15 seconds. Yes, the fear that someone will take advantage of that, jump up and down screaming that they're actually a trans woman and then harm someone is, I guess, that's a possibility right now. And what we're also talking about is what our eyes see, right? We're talking about, I've decided that this person, because how they look to me is this gender, they should use this restroom. So assuming that you see a trans woman that you cannot clock, you cannot tell she's a trans woman, that's fine by everybody, right? Because you in your mind read her as a woman, which she is. You read her as a cis woman. So what we're talking about is what we think we're looking at, judging a person and deciding where they can go. It doesn't necessarily work. You can't. You think you can, but it's actually a really inaccurate way to legislate where people can go to the bathroom. So like take 5 people and then take another 5 people and then take another 5 people. Eventually, you're going to get some conflict. You're going to get some disagreement about what that person is and where they should be able to use the restroom.
Okay, there's some other comments here I'd like to share. Wonderful, insightful, and important lecture and discussion. Another question here, what happened to the boys who threw the child over the bridge?
I do not know. That is an that clip is about 10 years old, and she's referring to something, I think she says, that happened about 10 years prior. So it's the early aughts, I believe, and I do not know if history and is any indicator. They probably, if they were punished, they were not punished terribly harshly, is my guess. I'm hypothesizing, but gay panic defense has only recently stopped being used. Like, I hit on you in a bar and you murder me. That's actually a defense. I hit on you. You were terrorized. That is historically a defense for murder. So my guess is they were not punished that harshly, but I don't know.
Yeah. Another comment here. This was the first time I noted the parallel between the negative experiences I had growing up as a person of color and what an LGBTQ individual experiences. Thank you for that moment of awareness.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us and listening.
Yeah, that's some great feedback. One of the things I wanted to, and again, anybody else who has any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat, raise your hand if you'd like to be unmuted and ask it directly. I think one of the things that you've referenced a number of times is the sort of this fear of what is different, what is unknown. But I think also part of that is a perceived threat to white male masculinity, and I think that's sort of a theme here that runs not only through gender and queer issues, but racial issues and probably a whole host of others. And I'm wondering if you could just talk about that a little bit. I think it's been referenced here a couple of times, but so much of the violence and pushback and denial of rights and so many other things is directly that. It's a threat to white male power, essentially, just to sort of call it out. But anyway, I'm just wondering if you could address that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm all for overthrowing it. So it's interesting because, you know, from the time we're really little, if you look at, my husband is a teacher, and he was studying language on boys' toys and girls' toys, whoever decides that. And the language is startlingly different. Also, the design is really different. Girls are pink and have curly cues, and boys are block letters and all caps, and it's very harsh. You know, it starts so young, this idea of how we are socialized. It starts with a little headband, right? You're going to treat the child differently because it's a girl. It goes to a playground where I think it's like 4 boys aren't allowed to cry anymore. There's like an age when we're not supposed to cry. And if you think about it, boys have dolls. Boys are given dolls. We call them action figures, and we don't take care of them. We try and destroy them, right? So if you give a girl a doll and she tries to destroy it, you take her to a shrink. If a boy wants a doll to take care of, you might let him for a minute, but at a certain age, you're going to say no. So we're taught to be destructive. We're taught to be, there's a book called Amateur by a trans man, and that author just today had an article in the Times about the masculinity crisis. A football player, the first active football player, just came out of the closet, and it really challenges our ideas about this equation, the gender unicorn, gender identity, gender expression, and what we saw with the Rock Hudson, Doris Day, like gay men are effeminate, especially when we look at football players. Those are warriors. We treat them like warriors. the most masculine thing you can do is be a warrior, and then below that is like sports hero. So yeah, I think there is a real threat, and people are on both sides fighting back. I'm all for seeing it just go down in flames personally. To me, there are as many genders in the world as there are people. I mean, it's unclear to me why. I've never come to the reason, why did I have to be terrorized when I realized I was gay? It's unfathomable to me that that had to be a moment, followed by years of suicidal ideation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think that could be, what, a year-long kind of course on all of that.
Lifelong.
Yes. So a couple of other questions here. Not really related, but I have always been curious, why did the AIDS epidemic so heavily impact the gay community?
Because of the way it's transmitted, number one, and because of point blank homophobia and racism. Because we had a president who allowed tens of thousands of people to die without mentioning a word, and with giving nearly no money towards something that was killing people so quickly and so viciously. And still in BIPOC communities, rates of AIDS, HIV infection are significantly higher than in the white population, which speaks to racism. But you know, I think 7 people died, if you remember the Tylenol scare, when somebody put, I think, cyanide in some Tylenol caplets. It was within a year. We had safety tampering measures. Like, Congress got on it. And famously, they funneled a great deal of money to Legionnaire's disease, which affected older white men, the Legionnaires. That got twice as much money as HIV funding, and I'm not saying the lives did not matter. Don't come at me later, but the numbers were not. The very few people at that point died from Legionnaire's disease, certainly as compared to the rising exponential numbers that were being affected by HIV and AIDS. So my answer is transmission, and because of that transmission, homophobia.
Got it. Got it. So 2 more questions. Please further explain cis and binary.
Cisgender is basically when you're born, they look at you, they see you have an innie or an outie, it's a vagina or a penis, and then you grow up. And if you have a vagina, you say you identify as a woman. If you have a penis, you identify as a man, boy or a man. That is cisgender. Cis is a relatively new term. I think it made up in the last 15 years by, I believe, sociologists to fill a hole in our language. We were not able to speak, we could only speak of trans people and normal people. There was no word for everyone who wasn't trans. It was a giant hole. So the idea was that you were normal or trans. Cis, I believe, means same in Latin. So cisgender means your body lines up with how we view your identity and your expression. And what was the second part?
Binary.
The binary is just male, female. If you're male, you wear a suit. Female, you wear a gown. It's these very, very narrow views of how we express ourselves and how we move through the world that make it just very simple. Man, woman, boy, girl. That's it. That's the binary. And that's why all these words keep coming out, because people are discovering and allowing themselves to be what they are, which may be trans or may be none or all of these genders. Maybe today, I know people who are like, today I feel more like a man and tomorrow I might feel more like a woman, and I'm gonna live my life the way I want. So that's kind of beyond, or neither one of those things ever. So that's the binary.
Great, thank you. One more question, and this might be a good one to kind of wrap up on. How much of this heteronormativity is enabled by mass media? Do you suppose that this quote unquote normal can be changed through the use of mass media?
There's a movie called Disclosure. If you have HBO, I believe. It is about trans representation in the media. It came out in 2019, maybe 2020. Disclosure. I had a slide here, but my presentation was going to be 8 hours long. So I did not use Disclosure. And it explores trans women, specifically trans people, specifically trans women of color in the media and their portrayal. And it's kind of a grandchild to a piece from the late 80s and early 90s called The Celluloid Closet, which talks about representation. It says of all gay people, but really it focuses on gay white men in media. I think media plays a huge role. I think media shapes how we see things. And the repeated drumbeat of that sameness affects us and sets up boundaries of behavior and expression. But I do not think, I was thinking Disclosure because they talk about this at the end, but changing representation does not solve the problem of violence against trans people alone. It is just one part of it. We have to do that work ourselves. So the media plays a huge role in the images that we see and the mythology that we believe. But if you are a young 8-year-old trans woman, trans girl in a place that is not hospitable to your existence, then that representation might mean a lot to you, might not get to you. It might mean absolutely nothing to you, as your life is probably pretty fraught with fear. So I think it's important, but I think it's only a piece of this larger puzzle.
Great, thank you. I was thinking as you were answering that question that one of the things, I certainly learned and became more aware of over the last year and a half or so was that to not be outwardly racist was not enough. It's more important to be anti-racist, to take actions, to be an ally and things like that. So I think that same philosophy really carries over here as well, that to not be homophobic is that's not the goal. The goal is really to be anti-homophobic and to educate yourself. And I think that's what you gave us a great opportunity to do today. Certainly we're very articulate and informative in putting together this presentation. And I just want to thank you again for the hard work putting it together. I really want to thank everybody here in the audience that's still here for joining today and asking questions and not being afraid of asking those questions. And I appreciate the time you've taken, Roger, to go ahead and answer those. As I mentioned, I am going to put my email in the chat, so in case there's any of these links that you did not get, that you can certainly email me, and I'm happy to pass those along. I don't know if you have any final words you'd like to finish up with, Roger, but again, thank you so much.
Thank you. My final words are, Jeff, thank you. Stephen, thank you. And everybody who showed up, again, with open ears and an open heart, I thank you for your time.